evening to you all. Welcome to the 8th webinar organized by Pallavan Learning Systems in collaboration with Center for Escalation of Peace. Before we start today's webinar, I would like to introduce you to the two organizations that are involved in putting this webinar together. Pallavan Learning Systems, or PLS, is an educational research organization that primarily focuses on the concept of learning how to learn. We believe in promoting learning in all its various facets and diverse forms. One of the main objectives of Pallavan Learning Systems is to conduct research and organize seminars and conferences very similar to this webinar. And we do this for the creation and dissemination of new knowledge so that what we do at Pallavan Learning Systems remains current and relevant to the rapidly changing times. The next organization, Center for Escalation of Peace, seeks to create platforms and establish programs that leads to a free exchange of ideas across borders with a very distinct focus on empowering young minds. This is because CEP takes the view that peace does not refer to merely an absence of war. Peace cannot be taken for granted or merely sustained. Instead, it is very necessary that peace is escalated through various platforms, various strategies, and various activities. That is why CEP's dialogues and activities revolve around three focuses. We have 1, youth and education, 2, trade and sustainable development, and 3, society and culture. Now, let us come back to the present webinar. Today's topic is the irrelevance of formal education. Do degrees matter? And we have the esteemed Dr. Dinesh Singh as our speaker. I do have one note for the members of the audience. Can I urge all of you to participate actively by typing in your questions and discussions on our Zoom platform? While doing so, please ensure that you select all participants and attendees on the chat box so that everyone can view your comments and questions. Alternately, if you are on our Facebook platform, you can use that platform for discussions and questions as well. Dr. Dinesh Singh will try to respond to as many questions as possible during the Q&A session later on in the webinar. Without further delay, can I now request the Director of Pallavan Learning System, Mr. Arun Kapoor, to say a few words and introduce our speaker for the day.
Thanks, Shoki, and welcome Dr. Dinesh Singh and the large number of people who have joined this webinar, this talk, this exposition, this discussion. I'm just going to take a few minutes to kind of, I don't know, to introduce Dr. Dinesh Singh, talk about him, because there's so much about him that is so fantastic. I mean, we were in college together. He, of course, went on to become, and I have somebody fantastic who's done a lot of work in the education field. I'm a history teacher and really happy to be a history teacher. Dr. Dinesh Singh was awarded the Padmashri by the President of India, which is one of India's largest, highest civilian awards, very well deservedly. He has done a lot. He's a mathematician. But apart from being a mathematician, and he's done a lot on mathematics, he's also very much involved with literature. So much so that he was on the jury of the Drumbeat Award, which is India's most prestigious literary award, and he was on the jury for that. He has an amazing mind. He thinks on his feet. He thinks deeply, and he takes time to think. So he's between both, thinking on his feet and doing deep thought, and comes up with new ideas, new thoughts. His amazing research and work that he's done on Gandhi and Gandhiism, not just the person, but the philosophy, is also very, very well regarded and respected. So people from all over the world have actually recognized him. He's been collecting honorary degrees from the University of Edinburgh, PhD degrees, from the National University of Ireland, from the University of Houston in America, and also the National Institute of Technology here in Kurukshetra. He's a member of the Advisory Committee of the Union Cabinet Government of India till 2018. He was the Vice Chancellor of the Delhi University, which was university that he studied in. He was in St. Stephen's College. And then before becoming the Vice Chancellor, he was the director of the South Campus of the University of Delhi. He was the AICT Distinguished Chair Professor. He's at the moment the Chancellor of the K.K. Mangalam University. He's the Distinguished Professor of the NGT University. He's an adjunct professor at Houston University. And he's also an adjunct professor at the Sholini University in Himachal. I'm stopping here because, you know, if I just carry on listing a lot of the stuff that he's done, half the time that we have for this will be gone. See, he has delivered lectures, talks, prestigious public keynote lectures all over the world. And so we are very, very lucky that he has found time and agreed to talk to us about this fairly interesting topic, which I will leave for him to talk about the relevance of formal education. Our 2 degrees matter. That's what he's going to be talking about. So just to mathematics and Gandhi and literature seems to juxtaposition themselves quite brilliantly in the way he functions, the way he thinks, the way he talks. He's fluent in Hindi, English, Sanskrit, and he is able to marshal in thoughts in all these languages. His writings, he has written books. His mathematical work has been cited in many works, many papers, many books all over the world. He earned his bachelor's and master's degree, like I said, from St. Stephen's College. He did his PhD from the Imperial College of Science and Technology and Medicine in London. He's a painter. He's an acclaimed public speaker and a student of Gandhian philosophy, as I said before. And is fond of literature in many languages. So English, Hindi, Urdu, very easy for him, and mathematics. And we at the Royal Academy and the Galpos Institute in Bhutan look at mathematics as a language. We try and understand it as a language. So this coming together of a mind with mathematics and English and Hindi and Urdu, literature and mathematics, this coming together is just perfect for us. He's, you know, so I'm going to stop here, introduction, otherwise it'll just go on forever. But this is what I wanted to say. Here's a mind that we're going to be listening to, ask questions, participate. And we might not be able to answer all your questions, but if you put them down, we will make an attempt to reply to you after the conversation tomorrow, day after, and the next week to answer as many questions. And we'll compile the questions and pull them out and the answers too. And on behalf of Dr. Dinesh Singh, I think he's the kind of guy who will take time to answer the questions that emerge from today's talk. So, Dr. Dinesh Singh, over to you. And thank you again one more time to taking time out to be with us in this mail of the conjunction of mathematics as a language, English, Hindi, Urdu, all of them together. And I also want to say here that in this, he was also a sportsman, as you can see, very fit. He was in St. Stephen's College. He was a college color holder in volleyball. So whatever he does, he gets to the top beautifully without effort, right? And I hope he gets time to talk a little bit about the interesting pioneering idea that he has in education. He's currently setting up something called in the form of the Internet College and the College of Startups. And he's also working on a book dealing with India in the 21st century. So you can see many aspects. Over to you, Dinesh. And last but not least, I am very happy and proud to call him a friend and look forward to spending time with him, always enlightening. And I'm sure this is going to be the same. Thanks, Dinesh.
Thank you very much, Arun, for your kind words. I know that you really don't mean any of them.
I think you don't mean any of them.
Because Arun knows me inside out, but he's a terribly polite man. And I confess that there is much that I have learned from Arun, and many of those ideas will be reflected here. So if you don't like them, and I'm addressing the audience here, then you know whom to blame. I am delighted to be present here today, and I look forward at this event more as a learning experience. A kind of churning happens every time we interact in such manner. And I am hoping that I will be a little wiser after the event, which is what I really need to do. Let me also confess that I really have no last word on what I'm about to talk. These are experiences that have been gathered over time. These are learnings, and some of them have worked, some of them have made us wiser, some of them deserve to be known better. And this is an endeavor along those lines. I also repeat that there is nothing like the last word, and do keep this in mind. This is all about, as the title says, this business of acquiring formal education. Even though the title says degrees, what I really mean is any kind of formal education. How important is it in today's world? Do we need to sort of pay heed, be careful, acquire the right formal qualifications? Or, as much of history tells us, and I will try and demonstrate that to the audience here today, that many of those who have changed the course of history, the course of mankind, the course of society, have been people who have had very little by way of formal education. And so I want the audience today to pause a little and reflect and see if we can achieve a balance between that which comes to us as being important from a formal system and that which may be acquired through other means that have not yet been recognized in some kind of formal, on a formal platform. Let me just begin by narrating some personal experiences that I acquired over time. Excuse me. So some years ago, I came across this first-year undergraduate at the University of Delhi. He'd had admission into a degree which is not really much sought after and is a kind of leftover choice for those who cannot get into the more prestigious, more in-demand courses. I happened to come across him because I was working on a project that involved some innovative thinking, some entrepreneurial activity, and a little bit of undergraduate level research. And I was looking for smart, motivated undergraduates. And I put out an ad. Many kids responded, many undergraduates, many of them very worthy. And I came across this student over there. He had just entered college. He'd been in college for 2 months. I realized that his whole life, he hadn't really done much in terms of formal acquisition of grades. His school passing grades were just about okay, barely average. But there was something special about the child. And I noticed that if I gave him a problem to look at, which involved some mathematical modeling with very clever coding of problems connected to the real world, modeling something in the real world, but in an innovative way so that we could gain through data some insight, that he was extraordinarily gifted, far better at handling data in innovative ways to gain mathematical insights. And he worked with me and we did some really good work, but I could see that he is also connected with institutions and agencies in other parts of the world with whom he would collaborate in the night. And I knew that he is not going to be with us for long. One fine day he turned up and he said he was leaving for the United States. There was a transnational corporation that had employed him. I asked him to be in touch with me, and he remained in touch with me for some time. And I realized that he had achieved extraordinary success and he had no formal qualification. And if you think this is an isolated incident, and this was a child in Delhi, a student in Delhi, just out of high school, before he could complete even 1 year of formal college education, to which he seemed to attach no value. He had already been recognized by many agencies and individuals in different parts of the world. But that's not an isolated incident. I have come across instances like this repeated. I set up an experiment over a 5-year period where I would look for extraordinarily motivated, bright, original thinkers who were not happy in their undergraduate environment. All I needed to know was, were they motivated enough and were they interested in mathematics or data and coding? And over a 5-year period, I managed to spot 60 such undergraduates who each year went abroad to an extraordinary institution in the United States. They had very ordinary first degrees of no relevance to what they had acquired in terms of knowledge and experience. That institution would accept them straight into a PhD program, even though their grades in college were very ordinary, the degrees were not relevant, simply because these students had put their faith in a group of colleagues like me, whom we had gathered over time, great teachers, great mentors, great thinkers. And these kids would spend more than a year working with us on projects that involved mathematical modeling, mathematical thinking, data, coding, stuff like that. And over 5 years, 60 such students went straight into a PhD program with no degree of any relevance from college and no graduate program at all. And all of them acquired PhD degrees with high-end original research. And I know exactly where they are working in many parts of the world with great organizations. But the story just goes on and on. Let me tell you another true story, and I'm just looking at random samples. You will find that the world abounds with such stories. Here is this Harvard MBA, 30 years of age, well-dressed, suit, tie, everything. Remember, he's a Harvard MBA. There's an interview in progress. Across the table is seated a 20-year-old kid, scruffy appearance, torn jeans. And here's how the conversation goes. The questioner asks, so here's a real world problem. I need to optimize the output of my operation using some data. And the answer comes, I will build a matrix of information and I will look at columns and optimize them using vectorial ideas and look at some intersections of geometry, so on and so forth. And the questioner thinks, if I start looking at this jargon, I will have lost several critical days and my competitors will have optimized their output and I will be nowhere. So the applicant gets rejected. Guess who was the interviewer? The interviewer was the 20-year-old scruffy looking unkempt person. The person who was applying for a job was a Harvard MBA. And this is a true story. The interviewer recorded later that I wasn't interested in jargon. I wanted to know in practical, clear terms on this specific problem exactly what he had in mind, but the applicant had no clue. I wanted to think about this. Here is this man, 20, just 20, set up a startup, has enormous funding in Silicon Valley. Here is this MBA with some experience with other firms, clueless about how to really get that operation going, even though he has a master's in business administration. And you know, it isn't that one day I just woke up and decided, yeah, these things are happening and we need to worry about that. It's a gradual process. I too started out believing in life that you need to have formal education of a high order, you need to have good grades. But I began to be in the company of good, wise people. One of them is Arun here. There were others. There was this really senior person, an elderly person who had retired. He was an educator, had been principal of India, one of India's most prestigious high schools. And I was talking to him. I was then about 26, 27 years of age. I was talking to him about the need to get good grades to be successful in life. And he told me, you know, Dinesh, I have 3 sons. The older 2 have been very successful in the academics. They have reasonable jobs. They make a reasonable income. My youngest son was hopeless at academics, barely managed to acquire an undergraduate degree of no use. He is the most successful and the happiest. He does something that is after his heart, makes the most money, and is extremely happy. And you know, that story has never left my mind. It got me thinking. That's one of the early times when I began to think, now why did he tell me this? He tried to imply that this formal education may not really have much bearing or correlation with how a person does in real life. And you know, I also remember sometime after that, I was spending a great deal of time in the 90s in the United States. And I came across a senior executive of a major engineering firm who told me that they'd been hiring a large number of students, many of them from India. They were not students. I mean, they were people who were looking for jobs, had been employed somewhere else, but were looking for jobs with him, where he said, I was aware they were manufacturing resumes which had nothing to do with what they had done in real life. But he said, we are letting them do that because I know they don't have those qualifications. What they have is something that we want. They are good at those kinds of problems for which we need smart people. And so we let them come with those manufactured resumes. What I'm trying to tell you is that this business of thinking like this, which has led to this talk today, has been a process. I came across an IIT student at one of our most prestigious IITs. And you know what he had to say? He was completing his final year of studies at the IIT. And he said, the whole experience of 4 years has been an academic void. He says, in terms of academics, in terms of knowledge, I have almost acquired next to nothing. He says the things that I enjoyed had nothing to do with academics. All he said I learned was how to give exams and to get my grades and forget all about it the next day. Exam after exam after exam. The story goes on and on. There was this waitress in New York who had to drop out for various reasons from a reasonably good college. She records a conversation she heard. She was serving at a table where a young lady had just graduated from an elite Ivy League institution, and her family had taken her out for dinner. And this lady, the waitress, was serving that table, and she could not but help overhear the conversation. And they were talking about somebody else in college, and one of the others present at the table says that that person is so obsessed with mythology. And this graduate from the Ivy League, having spent 4 years at that prestigious institution, as recorded by the waitress, says, what is mythology? What does it mean? We need to think about this. This goes on and on. Here's another story that happened to me. I was in Sydney. This was the time when I was Vice Chancellor of the University of Delhi. And I had to take a cab. As luck would have it, the cab driver was a young Indian. We got talking. I didn't tell him who I was. And I asked him who he was. I could tell by his accent that he hasn't been away from India too long. He told me, what a coincidence, that he had a first-class honors degree from one of the most prestigious colleges of the University of Delhi, known for its extraordinarily high cutoffs for admission purposes. Those cutoffs had hit the headlines just a year ago. He was from that college. He said he had graduated with a first-class honors degree in commerce. And he said he migrated to Australia under the supreme confidence that he's going to conquer the world. He said, I've been here now 2 years, haven't been able to get any half-decent job. They tell me I know next to nothing of any use. And this boy began to weep. He said, we are being cheated with these degrees for which we run like crazy. We run after them to acquire admissions. They don't really help us in real life. And finally, here's the clincher. When I became Vice Chancellor, I worked with a transnational firm, a finance firm. They were looking to hire hundreds of undergraduate degree holders in a job that required basic communication and basic data skills, ability to collect and organize simple bits of data. So if I gave you 25 numbers, arrange them in increasing or decreasing order, find the mean, median, mode, stuff like that. Very basic. And they were expanding in India. And there are hundreds of jobs. They were offering very good salaries. I persuaded them to come to the University of Delhi and give us a chance before they went to the rest of the country. And they agreed. They flew a whole team from Mumbai. We did not allow them to know much about any student from our university who was going to appear before the interview, only their grades, the course that they had done, and their name, not even the college. We had advertised widely in the university. Huge numbers had applied, and we had shortlisted 1,200 of the best resumes. This team that had flown in from Mumbai spent several days interviewing patiently, one by one, all of these 1,200 shortlisted resumes. At the end, guess, they hired only 3. They said they just didn't find anyone even half suitable. Not only that, they told me that it was a waste of time and they would never come back. That was a real eye-opener. That was a real eye-opener. And you know, that got me thinking. And I realized, what is it? Are we really playing around with the lives of our young? By insisting, because the world insists that you need a formal degree, so many of them get into debt in the United States. There are other issues in India. There are different issues in the United Kingdom, in other parts of the world. In America, college debt has also become a huge problem. And let me tell you another true story about this waitress who had taken an English literature degree from an Ivy League institution. And she was burdened with a huge debt, could not find any job, was working as a waitress in New York. And she came across someone while waiting at one of these tables who got talking to her, who urged her to take a simple data qualification, not from a university, some kind of private enterprise that would teach applicants, once admitted, into a data program. She took this course, she had to pay some money. She took this course. As a waitress, she was making something like, I think, $28,000 a year. She finished this 10-month data course. And straight after that, and this is not from a university, she got a $100,000 a year job straight away. Of course, she was hardworking, she was smart, she was committed, she was motivated. All these ingredients are required, so there is no magic wand. But she put in all the effort, and here she was with a non-university qualification that got her this lovely thing, while that Ivy League degree had done nothing for her but burden her with a huge debt. Now I want you to think, let's look at some of the great names in the history of mankind. Let us look at Jesus, the Son of God. Did he have a qualification? What university did he go to? He's changed the course of history. The Buddha, which university did he go to? There's this saint poet in India, Kabir, extraordinary mind, such a fine intellect. By all accounts, he was near illiterate, but he composed such marvelous poetry. He was a weaver belonging to what was considered a low caste weaver, composing poetry of the highest order. He was almost illiterate, and hundreds of doctoral degrees have been taken in different parts of the world, not just in India, on Kabir, in several institutions. Look at Mahatma Gandhi. He had no formal qualification beyond the high school. He finished a high school qualification. He had no degree. People are under the mistaken notion that he had a law degree.
He was a lawyer.
He did not have a law degree. He qualified to practice at the bar. Please be patient with me. I will back up everything I say. Be a little patient, please. He did not have a law degree. He just qualified to practice at the bar. That's all. What did he have to do for that? He went to no university. He had to clear 3 exams in which no one failed, one each year for 3 years running, attend 3 annual dinners, and that was it. And he would be qualified to practice. That's all. He had no university qualification. And look at what Gandhi did. I just took these names from a large list. This list is not just about people connected with spirituality or political movements or other things. If you look at the Chandogya Upanishad from ancient times in India, hundreds of years before the time of Jesus, the Chandogya Upanishad is rendering of historical accounts of the great gurus, the great wise ones. There is a story of Rick, who was a potter, but his wisdom was immense. And I'll tell you why I have picked at potters and weavers. And remember, even Jesus, the Son of God, was apprenticed to his father as a carpenter. So on and so forth. Mahatma Gandhi was so good with his hands. Kabir was a weaver. Remember this. So there's a purpose behind this. These stories tell us something. That's true education. If you go through a certain line, a phase of experiences that imbue inside you, engender creativity, original thinking, connections to the real world. I want this to not be a pessimistic talk. I'm not trying to demoralize. I'm not trying to run down anything. But we need to think carefully. Remember the 2008 financial crisis that caused such a meltdown, and God knows large numbers of people suffered, went bankrupt, very ordinary people. People whose life savings were wiped out. Who engendered that crisis? Who were the people responsible? A not very large number of graduates from the Ivy League institutions of the United States, largely on the East Coast. They were responsible. We must ask, what kind of education did they have? What really prompted them to commit such grave error? What made things go wrong? Did their education, did their learning, did their so-called wisdom not come into play here? I know many of them, I know some of them personally. They were using all kinds of newfangled ideas, but they broke the moral law. That's what went wrong. What kind of education if you are not even aware or care for the moral law? There is no purpose there. And so we need to think. And remember this, there was this very famous very good economist at Princeton, Alan Krueger. Krueger once conducted a study, a fairly deep study. And you know, not many people pay attention. Krueger was very famous. He just died a few years. And Krueger came to the conclusion that there is a large body of students who are quite capable of getting into institutions like Harvard, but choose to reject that and study at far more modest, not so well-known institutions. And he did a comparative study of this group of students with students at places like Harvard and other places. And he found that this group that is capable of getting in but does not, goes to lesser known, more modest, less expensive institutions, acquires a qualification. On an average, they were earning a little more than Harvard graduates. We need to think about that. And this is not me. This is Alan Krueger, professor of economics at Princeton, advisor to Obama, so on and so forth. It was a deep study. And I know that not many people pay attention to what Krueger did. There's another study, 27 very well-known institutions whose names are confidential. We don't know about that, their names. But there was a study involving 2,300 undergraduates at these well-known institutions. And they looked at 1 year of education and then one more. And they realized that more than 45% hadn't gained anything through 2 years of learning. Almost nothing. And they're paying very high fees. And overall, at the end of 4 years, 36% certainly had not any improvement to show for all the years and money they spent for 4 years. Even more worrying, this study finds, and this is a recent study, it finds that 1/3 of these 2,300 they had studied after graduating could not do well enough financially, economically, and had to move back to live with their parents. And 10% of them remained unemployed. They found that over a lengthy study that the 10% of them could not even get a job. So what is wrong? What is it that we need to think about? You see, one of the things that I have understood worldwide, and this is a trend that comes to us largely from the West, universities have created a culture that alienates students from good teaching practices. Do not expose students to good teachers. Undergraduate teaching is not given much emphasis at most of these institutions. Look, this is not one brush that sweeps everyone under the same tent. No, please don't get me wrong. I'm not running down any particular institution. They are all valuable. Many undergraduates do exceptionally well over there. But I'm talking of so many others who don't. And we need to think, and is there a way out? Are there changes happening? I wish to dwell on that a little bit too. So be a little more patient with me as you have been so far. University systems are alienating students from good teachers. Undergraduate teaching is not being given much attention. There is a culture of research that dominates over teaching. Research is important. The graduate programs are extraordinary. They come across great inventions. They do great things. But you know, a vast majority of undergraduates aren't really going into higher end studies for PhDs and research. They need to get on with their lives in another way. And are our institutions doing anything about that? That's where my worry lies. And we need to keep thinking. We need to keep churning in our minds. We need to keep examining. All the evidence that I have looked at seems to point that there are many things that are not so good with our institutions of learning world over. No particular country is being pointed out. We need to serve the needs of young minds. And I'll tell you what I have in mind. There's just one thing I need you to think about. To my mind, the most valuable thing a student needs to do to be happy, to be successful in life, is to discover himself. Education is all about self-discovery. I believe each one of us is born with a drumbeat within. Each one of us. And our job in life, if you want to be educated, is to learn to discover that drumbeat. And once you discover the drumbeat, then march in the real world in harmony with that drumbeat. That's when you will start getting educated. This is a lifelong process. It will never end for most of us. But that's when your real education will begin to happen. To do that, you need to be exposed to the right organization, to the right environment, to the right way of thinking, to originality. Now look at Mahatma Gandhi. I told you he had no university degree, yet he had found his drumbeat through an external stimulation when at the age of 7 or 8, he happened to witness this play, Satyavadi Raja Harishchandra, story about this mythological king Harishchandra, who adhered to the truth no matter what the cost, at the cost of his family, his children, his kingdom. He gave up everything, but refused to give up the truth. That struck a chord. It awakened Gandhi's drumbeat, which told him that's what you need to do. That very night, in front of the mirror, Gandhi took a pledge, a vow that for the rest of his life, he will adhere to the truth no matter what the cost. And you will notice, if you do a deep study of Gandhi, that for the rest of his life, it is nothing but a quest to understand the truth and to practice it as he understood it. That's all Gandhi was about. Everything that he did can be traced back, sourced back to this quest to adhere to the truth, to discover it and to adhere to it. That's creative, original thinking. Gandhi was fortunate. There was a play that stirred the drumbeat. He was able to hark to it. Sachin Tendulkar, the great batsman, he was fortunate too. At a very young age, he used to play ping pong before he took up cricket. And then suddenly he came across cricket. I think he was less than 10 years of age. And he realized, this is what I want to do in life. And then he adhered to the pursuit of cricket. He practiced marching in the real world in harmony with the drumbeat of cricket. No matter what the cost, he has no qualification beyond high school. And he has been awarded the Bharat Ratna, India's highest civilian honor. He has no degree beyond high school. Why? Because he found his drumbeat. Educational institutions need to do that. They need to stir your mind inside your heart, to get it inside, to dwell in your heart and figure out what is your drumbeat. How do you do that? To my mind, one of the first things that you need is a good mentor. You need someone who can tell you, expose you to many drumbeats. You need a good curriculum. You need creativity. And this is where our institutions fail again. And I worry sometimes that they don't seem to want to pay attention enough. You know, some decades ago, not very, very long ago, but a few decades ago, there was this psychologist, social scientist called George Land in the United States. He was a consultant at NASA. NASA was concerned because they wanted a space program that would beat the rest of the world, particularly the Soviet Union. So they were looking for highly creative people. Land was being consulted by NASA to help them identify creative engineers, space engineers. And Land eventually devised a test for creativity, a written test. And he found that he could identify and spot people from amongst NASA's whole bunch of employees as engineers, some of whom then turned out to be far more creative than the others. And then Land realized that the test is so simple. And remember, in simplicity lies genius. There is a saying in Hindi, saralta mein prabhuta hai. There is divinity in simplicity. Land's test is like that. And so Land thought, why don't I look at young minds, very, very young minds, to see if they are creative. So Land took up 1,600 children of the age group of 4 to 5 years who had not yet entered school. And he gave them that creativity test. Guess how many of them were identified as being in the class of genius as creative people? You'll be surprised, 97%. And Land continued to study this cohort right through their life till they turned about almost 30 years of age. if I remember correctly, till about 30. After 5 more years of the school, he realized that he gave them another creativity test, and the number of highly creative original people had dwindled to 30%. He did that 5 more years later, and it had dwindled to 12%. His final test with this group was when they were around the age of 30, and there were only 3% of them who were deemed to be creative. This formal education, living in the world in a formal way, had killed their creativity. Just think about it. Our institutions somehow don't engender creativity. They do the opposite. And I'll tell you a true story again. I know a very gifted space engineer at NASA. Extraordinary. He was primarily responsible for the design of the space station program, the entire program. Really gifted. Well, he took voluntary retirement just a few years ago. He'd done so much work, highly awarded, highly recognized. He decided he needed to do other things. And he loved teaching. And there was a community college in the US very close to where he lives. And he went, here is this man, designed the space station, designed other critical things for NASA. He goes to this community college, meets the head of the institution, hands in a resume and says, I'd love to teach a program on what is engineering in your community college. He realized there was a course there called What is Engineering. The head of the institution was courteous. They had coffee together. She looked at the resume and said, I'm afraid we can't let you teach. And so he asked, why would that be? I'd love to do this. I don't want any money. I'm not looking for salary. Just give me a voluntary program. She said, well, no, you really don't have a PhD in this area. And he had to leave crestfallen. What a loss for those students. He was a man who could have exposed them to creative way of engineering, doing the things that really matter in the world. But the head of the institution refused to allow him. What a tragedy, but this happens all the time. Why do you think Srinivas Ramanujan, who had made fundamental discoveries at the time that Madras University threw him out, he was expelled without even an intermediate qualification? Why? Because he could not clear the exam in the English language. At that time, when they expelled him, snatched away his scholarship, Ramanujan had discovered mathematics of the highest order, comparable to some of the finest achievements of combined mathematicians of 200 years of Europe. And yet, this institution threw him out. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Somewhere they need to be less rigid, a little more relaxed, a little more open. Why don't we learn lessons? Do you know Gandhi, as I told you, had no formal degree? Do you know who was Gandhi's spiritual guru? The man who put him really on the practical path on his quest for truth? Rai Chand Bhai. Who was Rai Chand Bhai? Did he have a PhD or a master's or a bachelor's? None of that. He was a successful diamond merchant of Surat. And he was Gandhi's spiritual guru. He showed Gandhi the true path. In his hours of crisis, Gandhi used to consult. So what is it that we are looking for? What do we want institutions to do? And there are many institutions that are doing these things in the world. They're actually doing them. It's not that there is everything that causes us to wring our hands in despair, be worried. So I want to point out a few things. Even I have played a small role in a very modest way, and I'd like to share some of this. So remember, I told you, what is it that we need to do? If we really want to create a good institution, if we really want to engender creativity, if we want our students to acquire something that will allow them to discover their drumbeats in life, well, set the curriculum in such a way that it is centered around the needs and challenges of society. It will perforce dictate that your curriculum must require transdisciplinarity. You must make sure that this is a practical, hands-on curriculum. Students must learn through projects connected to the real world. Students must learn to collaborate. And to do all this, students must learn to be good at communication, at analytical skills, have good critical skills, learn to handle data and some IT. And then when you get exposed to all these drumbeats in the world, like Gandhi was exposed to the play, you will begin to find one drumbeat that will resonate more than the others with your inner drumbeat. And that's what you will need to pursue in life. Then it becomes imperative for that institution. It becomes imperative for that institution to ensure that when you're marching, trying to keep pace with the drumbeat, to create a good path. That's where teachers must become mentors more than anything else. This business of forever lecturing on the blackboard, insisting on giving you notes, making you go into exams which are bad ways of assessing, is not really going to help. So you must learn to be good assessors. What is good assessment? Tell you a true story, again from one of the Upanishads, which dates back to hundreds of years before the time of the Christ. To the Gurukul, the university of the great Guru Haridrumat, comes a 12-year-old child. One more lesson here. In India for a long time, and I've had some historians working on projects even up to the 18th century in Bengal, this habit, this practice used to persist. The young would not enter formal institutions of education till they had turned 12. Till then, they were largely homeschooled or schooled in an environment very close to the home, in a much more natural, easy setting. So at age 12, this child tries to enter the Gurukul, the university of the great Guru Haridrumat. And Haridrumat asks, child, we admit only Brahmins. What is your lineage? And the child says, I asked this question of my mother before I set forth for your Gurukul. And my mother said, I have worked as slave in many homes, as a maid. Many men have taken advantage of me. I have no idea who your father is, but you proclaim yourself proudly as Satyakam, the son of the maid Jabal. When Satyakam says this to Haridrumat, Haridrumat proclaims with joy, child, a Brahman is not by birth. Only adherence to the truth is the hallmark of a Brahman, and therefore I admit you. That is how we need to assess, to look for the right insights. This adherence, bold adherence to the truth, knowing that he was not a Brahman by birth, maybe it didn't matter to Satyakam. And Haridrumat was wise enough to recognize that. But the story doesn't end there. You know what Haridrumat does? He does not tell Satyakam. Much wisdom is in this story. And these are historical renderings. He says, he does not tell him, go recite the Vedas. No. He says, take this 300 odd head of cattle, go into the forest and do not return until they have multiplied threefold. Do you know that this is a project, a real world transdisciplinary hands-on project. It's a collaborative project. Wealth in those days was measured by the head of number of cattle you own. This is a project in wealth management, so practical. And Satyakam does precisely that. Until they have multiplied so many fold, he doesn't return. When he returns, Haridrumat says again, oh, there is wisdom on your face. I can tell you are enlightened. Who taught you? And then Satyakam narrates how he acquired all those insights, that wisdom that allowed him to keep the cattle protected, to keep himself protected, to get them to multiply. He had to perforce learn so many things with so many experiences, so on and so forth. Our institutions need to be a little more like that. I'm not asking you to revert to a forest dwelling system or to wear only a loincloth and work. That's not my point. My point is to get the spirit behind it. And you know, at the University of Delhi, when I was the Vice Chancellor, we tried to do that in very limited ways and in very modest ways. And I'm not trying to beat my drum here, but I'm trying to expose you to some success we had. So, you know, our objective was to allow children, students to somehow hark and to their drum beats, begin to learn to march in harmony with that and not worry about how the others are marching. You may be not in step with them, just be in step with your own drum beat. So we build the curriculum around the needs and challenges of society, of the nation, We got these students to get excited, motivated, because which young mind doesn't like to tackle problems of the real world? And that doesn't mean that that's the way you will be for the rest of your life. You will evolve, finding your own path. So we build flexibility, we build choices, we build multiple exit points and entry points. You could do so many things. And we made sure that through this natural way, they would acquire skills related to data, to IT, to communication in various ways. And more important, they became curious about the world around them. I also insisted voluntarily that they should try and learn spinning, the way Gandhi insisted on spinning, and you will be surprised at the kind of positive outcomes we had with students who used to regularly spin yarn, the way Gandhi had espoused it. The kind of transformation it brought about. They became creative individuals doing well in their studies, but really good at spinning also. Here's one experiment I want to share with you. Mahatma Gandhi became Mahatma Gandhi largely because of his experiences with train journeys. Had he not been thrown out of the train compartment in South Africa, Gandhi would never have embarked on this business of disobedience, civil disobedience, this moral crusade. And then, on one of his train journeys from Johannesburg to Durban, one of his friends, Kalimbar, gave him a book to read. Gandhi records that he started reading the book as the journey commenced. And when the journey ended, he had finished the book just about then. And he says the book transformed his life. He said, I had found my mission in life. That one book, and you can only do this on a train journey. It's hard to do that on a flight. It's hard to do that in a car. You can do that on a train journey. Maybe you can do that on a ship also. That book was Ruskin's Unto This Last. That's where Gandhi gets his ideas about non-cooperation, civil disobedience, and he begins to learn and study about the transcendentalists, Emerson, Thoreau, Ruskin, all of them. His ideas of civil disobedience come from there. He had found his mission in life. And then when he returns to India, he really begins to discover India when for one whole year, he travels the length and breadth of India in third-class railway compartments. And so I had this feeling that, and I have also undertaken many train journeys from my childhood. I have found them enriching, rewarding, stimulating, everything. So we hired a full train, rented a full train from the Indian Railways, converted it into a college on wheels, named Gyanodaya Express, the Dawn of Knowledge Express, subtitled College on Wheels. We selected 1,000 students. The first journey we selected only girls. We had decided a journey beforehand. We had paid the railways for everything, so we could decide the journey, where we will stop, what we will do, so on and so forth. Students, we advertised this with our students, selected them if they were willing to work in groups on all kinds of projects. Some worked on the design of the train engine, some worked on the design of the toilets, some worked on the cultures of the land they were going to visit, some worked on the entrepreneurial activity in some parts, so on and so forth. And such learning happened, such transformation happened with our students. We ran a journey each year like this. Each time we were rewarded in immeasurable ways. So many children became poets also along the journeys. They loved to write, but they discovered themselves, most importantly. I wanted to do that by hiring a ship and running it along India's coastline. Unfortunately, I got distracted. There were many opponents for my reforms, and I had to face some very powerful people. But I really wanted, and I'd almost worked the deal. I was going to rent a whole cruise liner. Semester by semester, my students would run and study along India's coastline from the east to the west coast and from the west back to the east coast, and gain knowledge, gain experience, and gain major insights. But we can do that. You don't have to really spend so much money. You can do that in other ways. There are other experiments I'm working on. We had a program called Design Your Degree, Bachelor of Technology, Humanities, Design Your Degree. I was questioned. I was hauled up before the authorities. How can you have a technology degree in humanities? And my explanation to them was, we are altering, re-engineering the mind through this program. The mind is the biggest technological marvel, And so I've decided to christen it a Bachelor of Technology degree. And most of the learning was happening under mentored project work. There was very little of lecturing. The first batch of students, 4-year program that graduated, went into startups, almost all of them. Most valuable startup has just moved to Silicon Valley from India after having at least, I think, about a 10 million, more than a 10 million valuation. Now they moved to Silicon Valley. These are students from humanities. They say you can't do startups in technological things in Silicon Valley if you have a humanities degree. Look what we did. That program was so successful. So I want to draw your attention to such things. And I'm not the only one. There are far better people than I. Arun On at the academy in Bhutan, the Gyalpo, Druk Gyalpo's Academy, Institute, University, the King's Academy. They're doing marvelous work there. Elon Musk in his own way is doing great work there. The London Interdisciplinary School in London, we need to look at what they are doing. They're all implementing these ideas in their own and better ways. The Dyson Institute at Warwick, a full university by itself, is also doing pioneering work. So there are lots of good things happening. My contention is the old order needs to change a little bit. And this new order needs to be ushered in with more respect, with more gusto, with more enthusiasm. And that's why I say that the formal degree system as it exists may not matter as much as it does now in the days to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dinesh Singh. Thank you so much for such an inspiring talk. I think what you have done quite wonderfully is present a very difficult, complex, and controversial topic in a way that people can relate to, and you presented it in a logical manner and super interspersed facts and examples that really substantiated what you were saying. But because it is controversial, I think what we have are a lot of questions, both on the Zoom platform as well as Facebook. So we will just look at some of the questions. And what I will try to do is club most of them together because there are a lot of questions. So things that find similar, I'll just club them together. But moving on to the question, I think it connects to your last point. The idea that we are set in our ways and society is already built in such a way that educational institutes are a part of our social fabric and political fabric. So how do we now move away from degrees to drumbeats without destroying this fabric of society that we are such used to now? So how do we do it? I think we have the solution, but how do we go about it?
So you know, the national education policy in India and for higher education is almost entirely based on the experiments we conducted at the University of Delhi. The challenge is to understand the pedagogy, the way we went about it. If we can grasp that well, there may be some good changes happening in India in the realm of education. In addition, as I just mentioned, the examples of what's happening in Bhutan, the London Interdisciplinary School, Elon Musk's own ideas in education, the Dyson Institute, and other experiments, they are all giving, even Finland, I was told by Arun, Finland is also doing some marvelous things. And so I believe that there is change in the air, and we will, through these examples, learn to understand, imbibe, and bring about change in many other parts of the world. It takes time. Education is a slow process. And I guess it should be that way. There is grave danger. You could cause harm to young minds. So one needs to allow this to happen in a graded, gradual fashion. But I believe it is happening. I believe it is happening.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that was a follow-up question. Do you think the NEP will really change education as we know it in India? But I think you kind of answered it, but would you like to elaborate more on that?
Yes, you see, by itself, a policy can go either way. You don't do, if you become mechanical about it, it's not going to work. The most critical part of the NEP is to be able to understand the curriculum, which requires very good pedagogy, very, very careful pedagogy of a different kind. If you don't have that pedagogy, nothing will work. So there is a big challenge before us.
Okay. Let us move from now India to Bhutan. I think one of the issues that Bhutanese are facing, especially when it comes to degrees, is the idea that our really highly qualified and experienced Bhutanese are actually leaving for Australia, America. I think worldwide, the whole idea of brain drain is happening. So how do we incorporate your idea of formal education and what it entails into this system, where it actually helps in the issue of brain drain? How can we reverse it using your concept?
You know, one of the things that I have understood, there are people from India who keep migrating to Australia, also United Kingdom, United States, even Canada. So it's happening in many parts of this world. But the ones who stay behind, we need to look at why they do that. And that is because they're able to do things that resonate with their drumbeats. And one of the activities that I find, when you want people to see that what they are learning is resonating with their drumbeat and strengthening their core beliefs, is to make it very practice-oriented and add a semblance of innovation and entrepreneurship, a kind of journey of discovery. If you do that, economic well-being begins to result. As I told you, so many startups, even now at the University of Delhi, those startups that were created at my time, I looked at their evaluation just a couple of months ago, and they are evaluated at several $1 million, and they're running in Delhi on the campus. So I think even in Bhutan, we need to bring in this kind of constructive entrepreneurship, which should not be separate from their education. That's what we had done at Delhi. It was part of the education, part of the grade system, part of the credit system. That's when they are emboldened. That's when they learn to be creative. That's when they learn to take risks. And they must understand failure is as much a learning process as anything else. And I really believe Bhutan will change if we adopt these practices. And if I know the way Bhutan is doing things in education, this is bound to happen.
Great, great. I think the idea is really, I see a couple of things that need to change, the mindset of people, but then the institutes need to catch up as well and provide opportunities and platforms. And then I think even society as a whole needs to catch up. So if you had to align those three things, which should come first and which should follow, or how to ensure that they all developed concurrently at the same time?
Well, actually, see, what I propose, what has given me some success has been simply this, that you don't put the cart before the horse. Build a good curriculum around the needs and challenges of society. Climate change, slum development, environmental pollution, cleaning up of rivers, energy generation, so on and so forth. And that will require a certain transdisciplinary approach. And you will find that to be able to look at these things, they will automatically, as long as they work in a collaborative way, learn so much from each other. Peer learning is a very important part of the education process. You work in, and this is what we found very rewarding at Delhi University. So we need to do that. And the other things will begin to fall into place. And so eventually in a 4-year span, 3-year span, 2-year span, they will begin to diverge, the paths will begin to diverge, and they will acquire likings and evolution in different directions. Your system must be flexible enough to allow them to do that. So when we ran this program, this 4-year program in innovation with IT and mathematics, the only prerequisite was that you should be comfortable with some basic IT, basic math. That's all, nothing else. And you could end up being a molecular biologist or a computer scientist or a cybersecurity expert in the same program after 4 years. That's the kind of pathways and flexibility we had built into the program. The same degree program. That's what I'm trying to say. So don't sort of start by saying, okay, you're going to do maths and only maths. Right from day one, you're going to do history and only history. Allow a mix in a very creative, constructive way, and you will find things will begin to sort themselves out. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay. I think, again, the transdisciplinary approach is something we are all moving towards. Again, and you talked about how education could go on to address these problems. But looking at it in reverse, how do you think the contemporary global environment, be it the war, the climate change, the financial crisis, the fuel hike, all of these, and the pandemic, how do you think they are changing education as we know it?
Well, they should all be part of education. You see, let us learn to treat the world as a university. It's important to treat the world as a university. We make this mistake of, as Tagore observed more than 100 years ago, and even Elon Musk has said that, many others. You know what Mark Twain said? That he did not allow his schooling to interfere with his education. So he realized that formal schooling wasn't really educating. The world educates you. Look at the so-called dabbawalas, the tiffin carriers of Bombay. There is so much knowledge there in different ways. There's mathematics in it. There's embedded in it. There is collaboration embedded over there. There are communication strategies embedded over there. There's poetry embedded over there. But we don't look at it like that. We just talk of them as dabbawalas of Bombay. We will write a half-a-page story on them. Even Narendran students really look at them in such a superficial way. The kind of coding system that they have for delivery is better than what FedEx does. I am willing to wager that. They have almost a zero rate of error. There is knowledge there. And it's not 1, 2, 10,000. Hundreds of thousands of tiffins that are delivered every morning and brought back every evening without error. Think about it. But we don't think that. It hasn't entered our learning systems because we have created these silos. We must break those barriers. The world is a university. That's how Gandhi came about when this diamond merchant gave him direction. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes. Great. I think very insightful, Ji. Can I ask Mr. Kapoor to add on it and give his point of view? Because I think this is a very important question. The idea that how does all this environment affect education as well, instead of just using education as a way to address all the problems in the world, be it societal, be it social or political or environmental.
So I think a lot of what has been said looks at the higher end of the education, but a point I would like to, I wasn't expecting to talk about this, but schooling. See, the problem is that the schooling has become an end in itself, right? It is a thing. It's not necessarily a process. And that is the problem. When you look at schooling as a product rather than a process, that is where. So at the end of this schooling, what is called, and this is all over the world, what you get is a mark sheet or or at the same time you have done some coaching to get into the IITs or any other universities, whether you coach for SAT to get into American universities or GMAT or TOEFL. So you're creating a parallel universe from the school to find success in getting into universities. That is an issue. And therefore, if you look at schooling, and the question is between, and this is something I say all the time, but what is an educated person? As opposed to schooling, we need to bring education into the process. And if the question that is asked is what is the difference between an educated person and an uneducated person, right? If that's your ask. And a large number of uneducated people are very successful in schooling. In my opinion, the quality of choices that you make in your life, the better the quality of choices that you make in your life, the more educated you are. It's the quality of choices that and we live by making choices. We're constantly making choices. And we need to learn on how to help children think for themselves, like what the drumbeat that Dinesh was talking about, for what makes them, and this is again something the Bhutan Baccalaureate we talk about, that we looked at Guru Padmasambhava, and we looked at the fact that we are full of treasures, and that there are many different treasures that need to be revealed at different points when the society is ready to receive them. So we look at that from a perspective of children who are born with lots of treasures, and they need to help to reveal it to themselves at age-appropriate times. So therefore, one of the results of this process is that they will learn how to choose what make their drum beat. That will help them choose and figure out. So that aspect of being able to figure out who they are, what are the treasures, and the education system, like has been expressed many times, should help them become treasure seekers or treasure revealers to themselves, for them to be able to discover within themselves the treasures that exist and they are born with, are able to access, not necessarily born with only, but are able to grow up into that. So that is why we have a huge, there's a phrase that I use very often, that across the world, we are becoming a over-schooled and under-educated society, right? And schooling by itself is now a end product. It's a product. It's not a process. And what you're talking about in Bhutan, and that is why we, under the vision from His Majesty, that who put this out, is this whole aspect of which gets resonated in the upper end of education, which Dinesh has set out. But it needs to start at the lower end, where you help them find that drum. It should be part of the education. We should not just leave it to accident that something will happen and then you will find your drum. The part of education is to help you along the process of being able to find your treasures within. You become your own treasure revealer at the age-appropriate time. And what Dinesh said, the flexibility to be able to see. And the other thing I would just want 1 minute, I don't want to take away time from Dinesh because he's is assessment. How do we use assessment as an engine of learning, right? That is become a very important aspect. How do we help children assess themselves to be able to discover the process of learning and discover the treasures within and make choices that can help them find the drumbeat that Dinesh is talking about. And the question that has also come sometimes in the drumbeat, success is not necessarily found in wealth or status or title. There is a kind of success is the wealth of knowledge, the wealth, the status of being satisfied, content, and be curious to do things better. So when you use the word wealth and status, and there are many different ways of expressing the word wealth. It's not necessarily only money. The status is not only kind of in hierarchy in the society, it's also there. So I'm going to just, Choki, I hope that makes some sense. Dinesh, sorry to butt in.
No, not at all. Not at all. I think this is what needs to be have been said. I'm glad you said it. You know, that
Yes,
thing about happiness, just very quickly, as W.B. Yeats put it very well, it's a kind of equipoise between the moral, the sensory, and the intellect.
Perfect.
That's what we need to look for.
Great. I think following up on that, and I'm really sorry, Dr. Dinesh, most of our teachers, because they are teachers, they want our process. They want a process of understanding how they have helped their students find their drumbeat. But I'll go even further and say, how will teachers know that they have found their drumbeat first? Like they want a way of not exactly step by step, but pointers that will help them navigate their lives.
Well, okay. So you know, first of all, I found this very rewarding in my experience and in the experiences of many fellow journeymen. And incidentally, there's nothing new what I have said here. These things have come to us. I'm not trying to display any false modesty. They have been around with us for centuries, generations. So believe me, there's nothing original here. But so what I'm trying to tell you is this. I found it very rewarding when I'm confronted with questions with students, and I've tried my best to work. And the more I work with the more younger people, the more young people, younger, lot. I find it even more rewarding along these lines. The first thing I tell them when they ask me something is very frankly that I don't know. Let's try and find out. And let's try and find out collectively together and in humility. And I have found it very rewarding. Suddenly they get reassured. Man, I'm not the only guy who's stupid here. My teacher's just as dumb as I am. We don't know. Let's find out. And then this process of discovery engenders creativity, curiosity, a sense of well-being. So build your curriculum around hands-on project work to a large extent. Be like Hari Druman. Spot the special characteristics of different children and build your work and curriculum. Keep that flexibility so that you can build it around bunches of such special kids. Some for this kind of children, some for that kind of children. If there is a certain variety, a certain flexibility, don't look for closed answers. Don't look for closed solutions. Look, I mean, we teach calculus. I learned it in abstraction. It came to me naturally. That doesn't make me better. I'm just different. The vast majority doesn't learn that in abstraction. And I haven't found a single school teacher say, okay, I'm going to teach you how to land an aeroplane on an airstrip. You'll find the kind of interest students generate. If you say, I'm going to teach you how to differentiate a function, limits, calculus, they're going to get put off. Talk to them about landing an aeroplane and they'll take it to their hearts. But our teachers don't want to do that. They're so set in their ways that they just don't want to exert, break them. If you don't break them, as Tagore said, if you are not a lighted torch, how will you light other torches? Teachers need to be like that.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it is about collaborative effort and really understanding that there is no one final solution. So on that, I'll ask one last question because it ties into what you were saying about really collaboratively finding answers. So this question is about research, which has moved from finding answers to now just getting publicly recognized and published somewhere. So the idea of, again, formal education being all about certificates and money and college fees and all that. So how do we bring research again back to our lives? And how will the credibility be incorporated in that? And you can talk about India and you can talk about your experience throughout the world as well. It is about research authenticity and how can we improve it.
University of Delhi, when we got students to work on projects, again in collaborative ways, connected to the real world, there was undergraduates who developed a marvelous way of cybersecurity, encryption problems. They were immediately absorbed by the defense research the organization of the government of India. India is very deficient in cybersecurity. We do not have internal expertise. Most of the time we buy stuff from abroad, which also exposes us a little bit. And here were these undergraduates. The challenge before them was to create a method of encryption. And you expect that the mind will be stimulated. You're trying to see things. You don't want others to be able to crack your code. And resonated with some people. It really aroused their drumbeats and they became creative. They wrote a research paper and the defense organization immediately just grabbed everything. So there was this other bunch that were working on, they read about a village in Maharashtra in a remote part that it created running water, piped running water 24 hours in the village. This team traveled all the way to that village, studied the whole thing, built a reverse engineering mathematical model through a computer simulation, and built a startup around it, which could be used in other villages, other parts of the world, everywhere. Because they were taken up with this challenge. Now look, in trying to solve this real world problem, they were also becoming extraordinarily good at coding. They were also becoming very good at a certain kind of modeling. They were also becoming very good at understanding, a little bit of geography, a little bit of water, a little bit of architecture. And then someone may then decide to get into architecture. Who knows? So keep some avenues open, different drumbeats are being explored. Our teachers need to be patient. And remember, you're not going to solve everyone's problem, but at least start by solving some people's problems. That's what I'm trying to say.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Dinesh Singh. I think I'm talking on everyone's behalf when I say this webinar has not only been invigorating, but it has enriched all of us in our way of thinking of education in a certain way. For me personally, it has helped me in understanding and recognizing, even though I did before, articulating how education, when it becomes a business, loses its value, and we are only focusing on certificates and literacy. And it is so important that we bring education back into the idea of actualizing our own potential and finding that drumbeat and march with that drumbeat with everything in our environment, in our universe, in unison. So that becomes very important. So thank you for that. And now I would like to thank you again, and I would invite Saroj Thapa to give the vote of thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Dinesh Singh, for your wonderful, thought-provoking speech, which consisted of personal experiences, as you called it, stories of amazing successes of young people who had no formal degree to their name, yet they were so successful. So an important takeaway for all of us is the aim of education, which is to discover the drum beats that is within each one of us, which can be facilitated by an enabling environment. And we need to be, as teachers, as educators, as creators of that enabling environment, we need to be able to do that. So as you said, the old order needs to change, and the new order needs to be ushered in, inspiring all of us to think beyond the existing systems and break the barriers. Thank you very much, sir. I also express a deep sense of appreciation to this august audience, comprising of educationists, officials from Ministry of Education, philosophers, thinkers from countries. And it's truly a wonderful, diverse audience who made this evening very memorable with your comments and questions that made the sessions very interactive. And even on the sidelines, a vibrant chat was going on, agreeing with the views expressed by the speaker. So let's savor this inspiring talk and carry on this conversation in our various walks of life. On behalf of Pallavan Learning Systems and the Center for Escalation of Peace, I thank you all for your presence and participation and bring this session to a close. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I deeply appreciate this and I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed this. Very invigorating. Thank you, Arun. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Yula, thank you.